At the foot of Gulf St Vincent, South Australia, about 16 kilometres from the Australian mainland, lies Kangaroo Island, the second largest island in the Commonwealth. It is 140 kilometres long and 60 kilometres across at its widest point. Kangaroo Island forms a natural breakwater for the Gulf St Vincent, which can only be entered by Backstairs Passage or Investigator Strait. Lighthouses play a big part in protecting shipping in these lanes. Cape Willoughby, the first lighthouse built in South Australia, was built in 1852. On the northwest corner of the island, Cape Border Lighthouse was built in 1858. After several disastrous shipwrecks on the western end of Kangaroo Island, the Cape Tekutik Lighthouse was built in 1906. Captain Matthew Flinders landed there in March of 1802. It was he who named the place Kangaroo Island on account of the large number of kangaroos seen by him and his men. The surf-bound, rugged and precipitous coastline of Kangaroo Island has claimed many ships and lives during the latter part of the 19th century. There are 85 shipwrecks around the coast of the island. The first recorded shipwreck was the 20-ton cutter William, which was wrecked at Hog Bay on the 23rd of August 1847. The last vessel to be wrecked was the Santa Maria II. She came ashore at Villen Bay on the 12th of September 1996 and was a total loss. This is the story of 4 of those shipwrecks. This is Snug Cove on the north coast of Kangaroo Island in January of 1970. Peter Telfer, Kingsley Chapman and Gifford Chapman, after an early breakfast, are preparing for a dive on the Port Lamoureux, about 15 kilometres from here. After loading the dive gear into their boat, they head out of Snug Cove, passing yachts anchored in the bay. They then turn in a westerly direction, heading for the wreck site. We are passing Wreck Gully, which is the place where the Finnish barque Fides was wrecked in 1860. This is Cape Torrens, rising some 230 metres above the water. This is the highest cliff on Kangaroo Island. The wreck site of the Port Lamoureux is about 2 kilometres west of here. The Port Lamoureux was a steamer of 5,865 tonnes built at Kobe, Japan in 1919 by the Kawasaki Dockyard Company and owned by Tammy Shosen KK Line. She was 116.6 metres long, 15.45 metres beam and 10.9 metres draft. After loading 78,000 bags of wheat at Port Pirie, South Australia, the Port Lamoureux with Captain Horino and 42 crew departed Queen's Wharf at 6 a.m. on the 12th of March 1935 for Moji and Yokohama, Japan. Passing through the channel, she ran aground. 9 hours later, she was finally refloated without any assistance on the high tide and proceeded to Port Lincoln. Arriving at Port Lincoln, the hull was examined by a diver, S. Dunbar, who made an underwater inspection of the hull from stem to stern. He found the vessel not to be damaged by the grounding and was suitable condition to continue her passage to Japan. On Tuesday, the 19th of March 1935, the Port Lamoureux departed from Port Lincoln. All went well until 11:20 a.m. on March the 20th, when the vessel was 5 kilometres south of the Cape Tekutik Lighthouse. A severe bump was felt, and Captain Horino immediately came to the bridge, and the engine was stopped. Soundings were taken of the ship's holds and bilges. It was found there was 2 metres of water in number 1 hold, a little in number 2, and that 3 and 4 were dry. The ship was making water and steadily settling by the head. Captain Horino decided to head for Port Adelaide for repairs and steered northwards toward Cape Border, reaching there at 3:05 p.m. The main decks were awash with heavy seas breaking over her. Captain Horino signalled the Cape Border Lighthouse at 3:45 that he did not think he could make Port Adelaide and was looking for a suitable beach on which to ground her. At 4:15, the Kangaroo was beached just west of Cape Torrens. The captain and his crew lowered the lifeboats and rowed to the rocky beach. The tug Watto was dispatched from Port Adelaide and proceeded to the Kangaroo, arriving at 8 a.m. on Thursday the 21st of March. The vessel had settled firmly and was awash from fore to aft, the lower bridge with 1 metre of water over her decks. Captain Areno and the crew were transported to the tug Watto, which departed for Port Adelaide at midday on Thursday. The vessel was a total loss. Mr. Stan Sheridan of Western River, Kangaroo Island, purchased the Kangaroo for £50. He salvaged a great quantity of gear, including a generator from the engine room, which was later used to supply electricity to the township of Kingscote. The manganese bronze propeller and other non-ferrous metals were salvaged by New Zealand skin diver David Hunter in 1967. Today, the Kangaroo is the best wreck for skin divers around the coast of Kangaroo Island. Peter, Kingsley and Gifford are looking for the engine of the Kangaroo, which should be visible from the surface. There it is, about 8 metres below the surface. The depth here is 15 metres. The vessel is lying southeast-northwest. The bow is about 10 metres of water and the stern in 21 metres. Old wives swim peacefully through and around the engine. Fish life is abundant everywhere. The ship is completely broken up, mainly due to the cargo of 78,000 bags of wheat getting wet. The wheat swelled up and she broke open. This is the propeller shaft, which runs to a depth of 21 metres to the northwest. The 4-blade propeller was salvaged in 1967. One of the 2 boilers, one is standing upright, the other on its side. After a great dive, they head back towards Snug Cove. This is the fishing cutter Britannia, which was later wrecked near Cape Cassane with a loss of 2 lives in April 1981. Here we are back at Snug Cove. All but one of the yachts have left. Time for lunch and relaxation before diving on the wreck of the Feeders, which is at Wreck Gully about 2 kilometres west of here. The 387-tonne wooden bark Feeders was built at the port of Kristinestad, Finland in 1857 by Anders Granskog. The Feeders was one of many fine wooden ships built at this port in the 19th century. Feeders sailed from London for Adelaide on the 11th of January 1860 with a general cargo consigned to Elder Sterling and Company. She was commanded by Captain Robert Apsland, First Mate Anders Helgeman and a crew of 15. The Feeders had fine weather during the voyage and a good passage, but was delayed somewhat by light winds. She reached the Cape Border Lighthouse at 4 p.m. on the 21st of May 1860. At midnight the wind suddenly fell calm and no longer answered to her helm. She drifted towards the shore and struck upon the port side at 2 a.m. on the 22nd of May 1860. With a heavy swell, pitch dark and the sea washing over her, an attempt to launch the dinghy was made, but the sea washed it away immediately. At 5:30 a.m. the first mate Helgeman managed to reach the shore. 4 other crew members who were washed off the wreck managed to get ashore, but nothing was seen of Captain Apsland and the 9 other seamen. By this time the Feeders had completely broken up. The survivors stayed at the site of the wreck for 3 days. On Friday the 25th, they started walking to the Cape Border Lighthouse, a distance of 24 kilometres, arriving there on Sunday the 27th of May. Returning to the wreck site, the 5 survivors and Mr. Tapley, the head keeper at the Cape Border Lighthouse, found one body washed ashore, which they buried some distance up the cliff. The vessel had completely broken up and fragments of the ship and her cargo were strewn along the coast. A flagstaff with a shirt on it was erected to mark the place where the wreck had occurred. On the 5th of June, the 5 survivors and Mr. Johnson, a lighthouse keeper from Cape Border, departed from Harvey's Return for Port Adelaide in a lifeboat, arriving there on the 7th of June. Being a wooden vessel, Feeders has completely broken up over the years, and all that remains is part of the cargo: brass taps, lead pipe, bottles of wine, and bars of white metal. Gifford with some of the brass taps and fittings. They have been in the water for 110 years and they still work. Hand-blown wine bottles, some recovered with corks, lead seals and contents. Here are a few of the artefacts found at the site of the Feeders in 1970. On the 16th of November 1989, an engraved plaque attached to a limestone rock at the Cape Border Lighthouse was unveiled by Mr. Eric Sandland. Mr. Sandland is a great-grandson of the owners of Feeders. The party then moved to Snug Cove, where an underwater monument was loaded onto Greg Ward's fishing vessel, the Delmar Jewel. After arriving at the spot where the Feeders was wrecked, a 500-kilogram monument was lowered into the water. On Sunday, the 7th of December 2003, the place where the Feeders was wrecked was named Feeders Bluff by the Premier of South Australia, Mike Rann. Speeches were made by the Premier, the Finnish ambassador from Canberra, and Mr. Eric Sandland. A model of the Feeders, made in Kristinestad, Finland, was presented to the Cape Border Lighthouse Museum by Mr. Eric Sandland. The next day we leave Kingscote for the site of the Fanny M, the wreck lying in 3 metres of water, 5 kilometres southeast of Point Marsden and 6.4 kilometres northeast of Kingscote. The Fanny M was a wooden bark of 678 tonnes built at Carlton, New Brunswick by Samuel Stockton in 1877. She was 48.3 metres long, 9.75 metres beam and 5.5 metres draft. She departed from Newcastle, New South Wales on the 6th of May 1885, bound for Wallaroo, South Australia, with a cargo of 1,023 tonnes of coal. The vessel was under the command of Captain Samuel Stockton, 11 crew and his 11-year-old daughter. On the 15th of May 1885 at 1 p.m, the Fanny M made Point Marsden, Kangaroo Island. With a strong northwest wind blowing and driving rain, while running for shelter in Nepean Bay, she ran aground at 1:20 p.m. The crew immediately unloaded 50 to 60 tonnes of coal overboard into the sea, hoping to lighten her in the hope of floating her off at high tide. At 9 a.m. on Tuesday, Captain Stockton, accompanied by his daughter, came ashore at Kingscote on the Ketch Hawthorn to notify authorities. That night they stayed at Anderson's Queenscliff Hotel in Kingscote. The next day, Wednesday, the Fanny M caught fire. She burnt to the waterline and was a total loss. She continued burning until the 22nd of June. The vessel was insured for £1,200, which was much below her value, but the cargo of coal was fully insured. The timber hull of the Fanny M has long ago rotted away, leaving steel ribs of the vessel. Today, some of the portside ribs are still upright, but the starboard side have broken away and are lying on the bottom. The remains of the copper-sheathed keelson. Here is Peter Telfer struggling with one of the broken ribs. Some of the cargo of coal can still be found by digging into the sand. These are photographs of relics. The three-masted iron-screw steamer Osmanli of 403 tonnes was built by William Denny and Sons at Dumbarton in the UK in 1846. She was 54.54 metres long and 7.18 metres beam. The Osmanli was an early pioneer of steam navigation on this coast. On Wednesday the 23rd of November 1853, the Osmanli departed from Melbourne, Victoria, bound for Port Adelaide. In charge of the vessel was Captain Corbett, a crew of 33 and 48 passengers. She reached Portland at 5 a.m. on Thursday and departed a little after noon. The Osmanli had a fine trip all day, the whole of Friday the 25th. After it became dark, the loom of the land became hazy and indefinite. The captain expected to make the Cape Willoughby lighthouse by 9 p.m. When that time arrived and the lighthouse was not in sight, he put the vessel off course and stood out to sea some little distance. The engine was stopped and the vessel lay to. In about a half an hour, the engine was started and the vessel steamed on. At 5 minutes to midnight, the Osmanli struck amidships with great violence. This was on an outlying reef in D'Estuary Bay, Kangaroo Island. The instant the vessel struck, the screw broke off the shaft and the engine flew around with great violence. 4 lifeboats were immediately lowered and all the passengers and crew got safely aboard. No luggage or provisions were loaded into the boats. The only attempt to save anything was by the steward Gray, who was given the key to the ship's safe to remove the cash box valuables, including 2 bars of gold. They were put into a carpet bag and placed in the last lifeboat to leave. The lifeboats lay to for a while, then headed for the shore. On Saturday, the 26th of November, soon after daybreak, an attempt was made to board the Osmanli. A heavy swell was running, and they were unable to board her. A second attempt was made at 7 a.m. without success. At 10 a.m, the third attempt was made. The seas having somewhat abated, they managed to board her. On Sunday morning, a lifeboat under the command of the first mate, Gooch, set sail for Port Adelaide, finally reaching Glenelg on Tuesday the 29th of November. The remainder of the crew and passengers were rescued by the Yallatta, which was dispatched from Port Adelaide on Thursday the 31st of November. The wreck of the Osmanli was purchased by Mr. William Rogers for £230. During the night of Tuesday the 31st of January 1854, a strong gale from the southwest blew in and the Osmanli completely broke up. On February the 16th, 1969, the location of the wreck was discovered by skin divers Ron Pryor, Roger Williams, Kingsley Chapman and Gifford Chapman. Relics recovered from the Osmanli are on display in the Kingscote National Trust Museum. This is the site of the wreck of the Osmanli at D'Estuary Bay on the south coast of Kangaroo Island. Her resting place is the Osmanli Reef, about 3 kilometres east-northeast of Point Tinline, in 3 metres of water. Over the years she is completely broken up and overgrown with seaweed. The propeller shaft leading back to the remains of the engine. Here are portholes, engine dials and other relics found and retrieved from the Osmanli in 1969. Most of these are on display at the Kingscote National Trust Museum.